So now that we've covered the basic 6 mods that will end up on the majority of your builds, I want to talk about the various sniper specific mods as well as the more general things that I can suggest using on your sniper. And I'm actually going to hold off on talking about 2 specific mods here, as there's actually a far better place for them later in this series, and this episode is already going to be very long. You see, Lasting Purity and Voltage's Sequence are mods for the Volcar and Lanka respectively, and it just makes more sense to talk about them when I do those weapons videos. However, I will go ahead and say now that while the Lanka mod is just for fun, Lasting Purity is absolutely worth getting and will increase your Volcar's damage by more than even a second elemental mod will. As for the things that I actually want to cover in this episode, there are 11 and a half things to talk about. The 6 sniper-specific mods, the 5 non-sniper ones that I can suggest, and the sole arcane in the game that requires a sniper to receive any benefit from. But let's start with the sniper mods, and we will begin on what is probably the best of them overall, Harkener Scope. This comes from Kill to Thame, and it increases the time it takes for your combo meter to drop by an additional 12 seconds per point. So if you've got a 300 hit combo multiplier with a normal sniper, and you put it away for 3 minutes, it'll still have 287 points left on it when you pull it back out, instead of the 210 points you get otherwise. Much more importantly, basically every mission you will ever do has at least occasional breaks in the combat of more than the 2 seconds it takes for your combo meter to start deteriorating, so this ends up seriously helping boost your overall combo counter when doing pretty much any sort of long mission. So while I don't personally use this mod much anymore, I still highly suggest you at least try Harkener Scope out and see if you like it, especially if you have trouble getting that combo meter to decent levels. And now that we've covered the best of the sniper mods, let us move on to what is probably the worst. Sharpshooter is horrible on a number of levels. First up, it comes from Arbitration, and it is a 10-star rare mod, so it's very expensive to level. And your reward for leveling it is a pretty awful mod. When you get a headshot kill with a sniper, you get up to 15 energy back, which doesn't sound all that bad on the surface, but it doesn't count if your bleeds kill the target. You probably will not be landing headshots for the killing blow enough to really benefit much from this, and there's just so many better ways in the game to get your energy back that I can't ever actually suggest you use a slot on this thing unless they decide to seriously buff it. And that buff would need to be at least double the energy gain before I could even begin to suggest it. And I also wouldn't suggest depleted reload either, though it is much better than Sharpshooter in that it has at least one sniper that it's not horrible on, just simply kind of bad and outdone by prime fast hands. You see, this thing reduces your magazine size by 60% and it increases your reload speed by 48%. But unfortunately, reload speed is a pretty misleading statistic, and that 48% actually reduces the reload time of your snipers by about 1/3, and so it's just not nearly big enough of a benefit to make up for the 60% reduction in magazine size on most snipers. However, it is noticeably better on the Vectis Prime, as it turns that sniper into a single-shot rifle with a 0.6 second reload time. This doesn't sound too awful until you realize 2 things. First, Prime Fast Hands just gives you even better reload speed than depleted reload and without using any negatives, so why wouldn't you pick it? And second, you have just traded out the Vectis' relatively quick 2-round magazine for the ability to fire slightly slower than any sniper except for the Lanka. So please, just avoid depleted reload. I don't have anything against reload speed, and I will even try to make an argument for Sniper's reload-based Arcane at the end of this episode. But this thing is seriously just a worse version of Prime Fast Hands, so if you really want to increase your reload speed with a mod, I would suggest using it instead. Now, let's move on to something that's a little better, Target Acquired. This one is actually a bit like Depleted Reload in that it loses something when not used on the right sniper, but it doesn't reach that thing's level of terribleness. You see, this thing increases your headshot damage by 60%, assuming that you don't already have a headshot enhancement, which the Snipetron, Vectis, and Volcar already do on zoom shots. So you can expect to see the Rubico and Lanka gain a pretty big damage buff from this. The bonus for the other 3 snipers is going to be about 40-ish% instead, and that'll actually shrink slightly as your zoomed headshot multiplier rises. Still, if you're able to reliably land headshots on the majority of targets, it'll give you a nice jump in damage even when it's used on one of the less fitting sniper rifles. However, since it requires headshots to have any effect, and headshots are already going to be fatal at pretty much any level below 100 and even a fair amount of the time after that, I don't really suggest this mod for the majority of players. As for the last 1.5 sniper unique mods, they are just Charge Chamber and Prime Chamber. Charge Chamber is a simple mod that gives you a 40% total damage boost, as in 40% including all multi-shot elemental mods and combo counters, on the first shot in the magazine. This generally isn't particularly impressive, but it might be worth it on the Vectis Prime if you like reloading a lot. As for Prime Chamber, you're never going to get a copy of this mod. It can only be gotten directly from Digital Extremes or traded for what's probably going to be a horrifying amount of platinum, and it is basically a Charge Chamber with a 100% damage boost instead of a 40%. This is very nice and would absolutely be worth it on the Vectis, but it is far, far from being worth its ridiculous trading price, especially since most of the time snipers are going to be doing more damage than you strictly need anyways. And that's it for the sniper-specific mods. None of them were particularly great, and the main reason I was covering them was just for completionist's sake. But if you have to choose one of them, I would suggest Harkener Scope above all the others, as the rest of them are just underwhelming, not useful in practice, or simply really, really bad. However, those are not the only mods that you can possibly put in those last 2 slots of your sniper, and in fact, I don't currently use any of the actual sniper-specific mods on my regular builds. You see, there's 5 general rifle mods that each provide a substantial benefit that I tend to simply find more useful in practice than what any of the actual sniper mods do. And let's begin covering those by talking about Vigilante Armaments. This both increases your damage by giving you multi-shot, and as those who've watched my Hunter Munitions video know, actually increases your chance of getting at least 100 munitions proc per shot thanks to that multi-shot. And with snipers, 1 proc is generally all you're going to need against high-level armor targets. Furthermore, it is a multi-shot increase, so on all snipers except for the Lanka, it increases your combo gain speed by a small amount. And it gives you a 5% chance to get a souped up crit, which at this level of damage you generally won't need, but is still kind of nice. So yes, this is a very, very strong choice, especially for snipers that are built for viral damage, which also only needs 1 of its hits to proc to be effective. As for Arcane Scope, I actually don't feel it's too important on the snipers, but it is well worth talking about and sometimes worth considering on certain low crit snipers. As said before, Hunter Munitions is going to be your best damage option against high armor targets, and once you get past 100% crit chance, crit stops increasing your chance of getting any additional slash procs, and while the extra raw damage is nice, it's generally not going to be super important at this point. Once you've got 2 elemental mods and the 4 basic non-boss mods in place, you've usually reached the point where you're either killing things in one shot, or wanting a Hunter Munitions proc to bypass its obscene armor. That said, it is pretty nice to see colorful numbers pop up, and it can also help the lower crit weapons get a better chance of proccing Hunter Munitions, so it's not a mod to dismiss out of hand, just one that doesn't end up being as useful on all snipers as it initially appears. Similar situation with Vital Sense, but a little bit more questionable in normal circumstances. It's a great source of extra damage, and you can expect to get rewarded for using it often thanks to Sniper's high crit chance, but snipers already hit very hard, and adding more damage isn't really going to increase your killing potential against normal targets, as you will probably either already be nuking them down even without this mod, or hoping for Hunter Munitions to proc, which yes, it will kill faster with this mod equipped, but it'll generally already be fatal even without it. So Vital Sense isn't super thrilling on a lot of builds, even if you're using the Rubico, which gets the biggest damage boost from it. However, this mod does help a lot against the Iolans, and it is also a great way to boost the damage of any gas procs if you are using that sort of build, which significantly helps that element scale better into high level content. So yes, keep this mod in mind, but be aware that Vital Sense's advantage is just more raw damage, and you will generally have all of that you actually need anyways. Now, speaking of gas damage, another option would be to fill one of those slots with a second Toxin mod. The gas's effect scales with your weapon's total toxin damage, and fire doesn't help at all, so combining Infected Clip with Malignant Force and Thermite rounds will give you the best combination of raw status and AoE gas damage that you're going to get without a Riven. So if you want to maximize your sniper's AoE damage, combining this with Vital Sense will be your best option, but be aware that Vital Sense is still going to be the better of the 2 mods, both in terms of gas damage and overall damage, and if you only have room for one of them, I highly suggest Vital Sense over adding on a 3rd elemental mod. Now, the final mod I want to talk about is actually Vial Acceleration, which is basically required on the Lanka and might be worth using elsewhere with a certain thing that we will talk about in just a moment. For the Lanka though, yes, you need this. It increases the charge rate of your shots by a large amount, which is something you will need in every part of the game. And while you do lose 15% damage, what it means is that 15% is subtracted from your bonus damage like what you get from Serration and not from your total damage. So basically, if you're using a max Serration, your Serration will give you only a 150% boost instead of a 165%. Yeah, you won't ever actually notice this mod's downside in actual combat, so go ahead and toss it on your Lanka, you won't regret it. As for Vial Acceleration on the other snipers, it's actually really good in some ways, but there's an issue. While tossing on Vial Acceleration would give you far better DPS than another damage mod, and also boost your ability to effectively kill more enemies in the same amount of time thanks to faster fire rate giving you a better ability to swap between targets, there's a couple of issues with the remaining 4 snipers that seriously put a dent in how much benefit you can get from fire rate. You see, snipers all have fairly small magazines, and this means that your time spent reloading cuts pretty heavily into any fire rate enhancement's effectiveness. And unfortunately, the only snipers that don't have at least a 2-second reload time are the Vectuses, which only have 1 or 2 shots per magazine, and so actually get the least benefit from fire rate out of anything in the entire class. And while you can make up for this with reload speed mods like Prime Fast Sands, this isn't something that I'd personally suggest on anything except maybe for the Vectus Prime. The most reload speed you're going to get with a mod is 55% with Prime Fast Sands, and thanks to the way that reload speed works in Warframe, this is still only going to be about 35% buff to reload speed, so it's not something that I can really say is probably worth the indo and credits required to max a pretty niche primed mod. However, there is a source of reload speed that is much more interesting, and might even be worth doing if you really like focusing on snipers, though since it requires you to use up an Arcane slot, I am very hard pressed to say this is worth it. You see, Arcane Momentum increases your reload speed by 100% at max for 8 seconds and has a 40% chance at maximum of activating when you land a critical hit, which, since you're using snipers, means that this buff is basically always going to be up. Now remember that reload speed is a very weird stat, and that what 100% means is that it effectively reduces your reload time by about 50 to 60%, but still, that is actually a surprisingly noticeable difference, especially on small magazine weapons like sniper rifles. Take, for instance, the Snipetron Vandal. Its maximum fire rate is 2 shots per second at base, it has a 2-second reload time, and 6 shots in its magazine. Which means that if you are in a situation where you are firing as fast as you can, whether due to swapping targets or needing to hit the same thing more than once, you will have 3 seconds of being able to shoot, followed by 2 seconds of reloading. In other words, when you are in a situation where you want to be going at full speed, the Snipetron will only be up 3/5 of the time. But if you have a single Arcane Momentum on and it is active, that'll drop the reload time by about half, and so allow the Snipetron to be able to fire 4/5 of the time. And basically, all snipers except for the very slow firing Lanka get similar results in the same situation. The Volcar Wraith moves from being able to operate just over half of the time to almost 4/5 of the time. The Rubico Prime moves from having half of a second more downtime than uptime to the exact opposite. And the Vectus Prime actually gets the most benefit as its reload time is dropped to just half a second or so, which is actually incredibly noticeable due to its ability to reload while aiming, as its new reload time is almost lower than the base time between when the weapon can fire its individual shots, which means that Arcane Momentum allows the Vectus Prime to sometimes feel like its magazine doesn't have a limit on it at all, and without cutting into its fire rate like depleted reload does. And that is just with one. While I don't actually suggest you use 2 Arcane Momentums as they have heavily diminishing returns, there is a degree to which they stack. So if you want, you can toss Vial Acceleration and 2 of these on your Vectus Prime and make yourself horribly seasick while you burn through all of your ammo in about 20 seconds. And speaking of Vial Acceleration, yes, combining it with Arcane Momentum is a solid choice on several of the snipers. Like I said before, the benefit of fire rate for snipers is capped by how often they need to reload, and Arcane Momentum helps patch up that issue. While I only suggest using Vial Acceleration or Arcane Momentum on their own with the Lanka and Vectus Prime respectively, combining the 2 items with the Volcar Wraith is actually a pretty solid option. It is theoretically insane on the Rubico Prime if you can swap targets fast enough to benefit from that, And I think it actually tends to help the Snipetron Vandal out the most in practice, as due to its relatively low damage and massive punch through, the Snipetron benefits the most from a somewhat spammy style of play. Now of course the problem with this Arcane is that, well, one, it's an Arcane, those slots are quite valuable, and two, you aren't always going to be firing at maximum fire rate, and so of course you won't be always able to take full advantage of this thing's increase in effective fire rate, but it is still a pretty interesting option whether you're targeting a boss like an Eidolon or just trying to swap targets after your snipers one-shot the last thing, and there are plenty of times where you'll actually get some pretty noticeable benefits from this Arcane in actual missions. So while reload speed is normally kind of a bad stat, and using an Arcane slot for it is something that I don't expect many people are willing to do, I still suggest that if you like snipers, you take a mission or two and play with one of the 50 spare sets of this thing that you probably already have from running Eidolon hunts, and see what you think about this thing in practice, especially when combined with a Vile acceleration using Sniper Rifle. And I think that's all that needs to be said about building snipers. All of this information should be useful for any sniper in the game, and will likely continue to apply to any new rifle that DE decides to release in the future. As always, I hope you enjoyed the video. If you learned anything, leave a like and subscribe, and I will see you tomorrow. Farewell.